It was December 2009 in Richmond, Virginia. A quiet neighborhood lined with manicured lawns, Christmas decorations, and the kind of peace people usually dream about during retirement. But for one man, that peace was about to be challenged in a way that shocked not just his neighbors, but eventually the entire nation. Colonel Van T. Barfoot was 90 years old. Most people at that age spend their mornings reading the paper, sipping coffee, maybe walking slowly out to the mailbox. But Barfoot wasn't most people. On that crisp December morning, he stepped outside, gripped the ropes of a 21-foot flagpole, and proudly raised the stars and stripes into the air. For him, it wasn't decoration. It was duty. It was pride. It was the very symbol of a life lived in service. To anyone passing by, it was a beautiful sight. A tall pole in his front yard, a flag catching the morning wind. But to his homeowners association, it was a violation. They claimed the flagpole broke the neighborhood's aesthetic. They called it disruptive to the curb appeal of the community. And just days later, Barfoot opened his mailbox to find a letter ordering him to remove it. Now, most 90-year-olds might have felt intimidated. After all, HOA letters tend to carry an air of authority. But Van Barfoot wasn't like most 90-year-olds. This was a man who had charged through minefields, destroyed German machine gun nests, and faced tanks head-on with a bazooka. He had served in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. He had bled, fought, and nearly died for the very flag they were asking him to take down. When the HOA told him his flagpole had to go, his response was simple. He said, "I've been in a war, and I know what it means to fly the flag. This is not about a decoration. This is about honor." The HOA didn't back down. They issued formal notices, citing rules about structures in front yards. They warned him that if he didn't comply, they would take legal action. To them, this was just another enforcement of their covenant. But to the community, and soon, to the country, it became clear this wasn't about a flagpole at all. This was about respect, legacy, and freedom. The story might have ended quietly if it weren't for one critical moment. Barfoot's son-in-law, outraged at the disrespect shown to a Medal of Honor recipient, contacted a local radio station. The radio host picked it up, and within hours, the story spread across Virginia. Soon it wasn't just local news. National outlets began reporting on it, and that's when everything changed. By the end of that week, neighbors weren't whispering about the flagpole anymore, they were rallying around it. Veterans groups started showing up in support. People from across the state sent letters and emails demanding that the HOA back down. And on television, a 90-year-old man in a quiet neighborhood became the face of a fight much bigger than one flagpole. What the HOA didn't realize was that they hadn't just sent a letter to a retiree. They had poked at a living legend, a soldier whose name was etched in the very history of the United States military, a man whose Medal of Honor wasn't sitting in a drawer collecting dust, but in his heart as a daily reminder of sacrifice and pride. The standoff was only beginning, and soon, the White House, Congress, and millions of Americans would be weighing in. Because you don't tell a Medal of Honor recipient he can't fly the American flag, not without consequences. By the second week of December 2009, what started as a small HOA dispute in a quiet Virginia neighborhood had turned into a national firestorm. The story of Colonel Van T. Barfoot, the 90-year-old veteran ordered by his homeowners association to take down his American flag, was everywhere. Local TV stations replayed the images of him slowly raising the stars and stripes outside his home. Newspapers ran headlines about the HOA versus hero standoff, and talk radio couldn't stop buzzing about how a decorated war veteran was being told his flag hurt curb appeal. Then came the tidal wave. Veterans groups across the country mobilized. Posts online called the HOA's actions unpatriotic, shameful, even outrageous. Thousands of emails and phone calls flooded the HOA office, demanding they leave Barfoot alone. Neighbors who had been hesitant to get involved began putting up their own flags in solidarity. Oak trees and porches down the street sprouted red, white, and blue overnight. But the biggest shock came when the fight reached Washington. Both sides of the political aisle, Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals, spoke up for Colonel Barfoot. The issue united people who rarely agreed on anything. Even the White House released a statement supporting his right to fly the American flag. It's rare for something so small to capture bipartisan support, But this wasn't just about a flagpole. This was about honoring the man who had defended that flag in 3 wars. Think about it. In World War II, young Van Barfoot had crawled through minefields under enemy fire. He'd destroyed machine gun nests, captured dozens of German soldiers, and even knocked out a tank with nothing but a bazooka. For his actions, he was awarded the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military award. He went on to serve in Korea and Vietnam, racking up a list of decorations and a reputation for bravery that soldiers admired for generations. And now, in his 90s, he was being told by a neighborhood committee that his flag was a violation of community standards. It was a clash of values so sharp, so absurd, that it caught the attention of millions. The pressure on the HOA mounted daily. What had started as a private letter became a public relations disaster. The Homeowners Association, once a group that operated quietly in the background, was suddenly on the front page of every major outlet. Their phone lines were overwhelmed. Their name became synonymous with disrespect. And here's the thing. Barfoot never raised his voice. He never cursed. He never threatened. In interviews, he spoke calmly, saying, "This is not about me. It's about being able to honor our flag." His dignity stood in sharp contrast to the cold, legalistic language of the HOA's letters. Every time he spoke, more people rallied to his side. The irony? The more the HOA pushed, the worse they looked. When they doubled down, insisting the pole had to go, national outrage doubled too. When they threatened legal action, lawmakers in Virginia began drafting new legislation to protect veterans like Barfoot from ever facing this kind of situation again. It had gone far beyond one neighborhood dispute. This was now a national debate about patriotism, respect, and common sense. By mid-December, the HOA was in full retreat. Their board scrambled to find a way out, but the damage was already done. News anchors called them tone-deaf. Editorials demanded they apologize. And their law firm? They began getting so much backlash that they eventually rebranded entirely, changing their name to distance themselves from the fiasco. Meanwhile, every morning Colonel Barfoot kept walking out to his flagpole. At 90 years old, he would grip the ropes, raise the stars and stripes into the cold Virginia air, and then stand silently for a moment, saluting the same flag he had risked his life to defend. Cameras captured him doing it. Neighbors stood with him. And across the nation, millions of people cheered for a man who reminded everyone what real honor looks like. The fight wasn't quite over yet. A final decision still had to be made. Would the HOA try to enforce their order in court, or would they surrender completely? One thing was certain. The story had already gone far beyond their control, because you can't order a Medal of Honor recipient to take down his flag without sparking a movement. By the 3rd week of December 2009, the standoff had reached its breaking point. The Homeowners Association had a choice: keep pushing against a 90-year-old Medal of Honor recipient, or admit defeat and back down. In the end, the decision wasn't really a decision at all. The HOA folded. They announced that Colonel Van T. Barfoot could keep his 21-foot flagpole standing proudly in his yard. After days of mounting pressure, blistering headlines, and national outrage, they had no fight left. What started as a private letter had snowballed into a full-blown national embarrassment. The news spread quickly. Veterans groups declared it a victory for every service member who had ever wanted to fly the American flag at home. Politicians on both sides of the aisle congratulated Barfoot for standing his ground. Local neighbors celebrated by flying even more flags, turning the neighborhood into a sea of red, white, and blue. But the story didn't stop with one man's victory. Virginia lawmakers moved swiftly, drafting legislation that would permanently stop HOAs from ever telling residents they couldn't fly the American flag. Within months, the new law was passed. From then on, no one in the state of Virginia would face what Barfoot had faced. His courage had reshaped the law itself. For the HOA, the consequences were lasting. Their reputation was shredded. The law firm that had drafted the threatening letter faced so much backlash that they rebranded entirely, trying to erase the stain of having challenged a national hero. Their credibility never truly recovered. Meanwhile, Colonel Barfoot went back to doing what he had always done, living with dignity, honor, and quiet pride. Every morning he would walk out to that flagpole, raise the stars and stripes into the Virginia sky, and salute. Reporters stopped showing up, but his neighbors still noticed. The man who had fought in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam never stopped fighting for what was right, even in his 90s. He continued to fly that flag until the very end. In 2012, Van Barfoot passed away at the age of 92. At his funeral, veterans, family, and community members gathered not just to honor a decorated soldier, but to celebrate a man who had stood tall when it mattered most. The flag he had fought for and defended throughout his life draped his casket, but his legacy didn't end there. In 2023, Fort Pickett, a major military base in Virginia, was officially renamed Fort Barfoot in his honor. It was the ultimate tribute, a permanent reminder that his courage had not only defended the nation abroad, but also inspired change here at home. Looking back, the lesson is clear. Sometimes battles aren't fought on foreign soil or with weapons in hand. Sometimes they're fought in quiet neighborhoods, against letters slipped into mailboxes, against rules that forget the values they're supposed to protect. Colonel Van T. Barfoot proved that you're never too old to stand for what's right. He proved that one man, even in his 90s, could rally a nation with nothing more than dignity, persistence, and an unwavering belief in the flag he had defended all his life. And maybe the biggest lesson of all is this: you never really know who your neighbor is until you try to silence them. The HOA thought they were dealing with just another retiree. What they didn't realize was that they were facing a living legend, a man who had already defeated Nazis, survived minefields, and stared down tanks. Compared to that, one HOA letter didn't stand a chance. So the next time you see a flag waving in someone's yard, remember the story of Colonel Barfoot. Remember that behind that simple symbol can be a lifetime of sacrifice. And remember that sometimes, even the smallest fights can leave the biggest legacies. Because when you try to tell a Medal of Honor recipient he can't fly his flag, you're not just picking a fight with a man. You're picking a fight with history. And history always wins.